All right, and we are live. Hey, Chuck.
What's up, Mav? How you doing? What's going
Doing
on,
all
brother?
right. We are hanging out on a
Yes,
Wednesday night.
yes, we are. Yes, we are. I feel excited doing this crosscast.
Yeah. So do you want to do the theme song for yours?
I can put it. I already put it in. I'm ahead of you.
Oh man, look at that.
Yeah,
We're already getting going. I don't have a theme song yet, so if anyone out
I
there
know.
wants to
I
write
was
me one,
thinking. I'm like, dude, should I make you one? I'll probably make you one.
yeah, dude, that'd be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That would be super great. So tonight we're gonna be hitting kind of one of them hot topics. Yeah,
Yeah, hot take indeed.
it's a hot take. So we've been talking offline a bit about this for a little bit, at least a couple conversations about talking something about this topic here. And I think it's great just to maybe jump right in. I know that the thumbnail, at least on my end for the live, has pretty much tipped our hand to what our topic is tonight, and that is going to be: Did Christians get transgenderism wrong? We're going to have a
Mhm.
conversation about transgenderism.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's an important topic. I wanted to come on and you invited me, and I wanted to just kind of make it like a crosscast because I've been meaning to talk about it as well. And then you said you wanted to do one for your show, so I was like, dude, let's just make a little crosscast. And you have some specific things you want to mention, what it's like, and then I'm just going to interject with some thoughts. And I think it's going to be good for both your audience and mine, or our
Yeah.
audience. You know.
Our collective audience. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk about this because I feel like many of the conversations now are coming in pretty hot. I know that there's been a lot of things we talked about. Even we even recorded one show concerning the shooting and talked a little bit about some things, that the shooting in Nashville, which we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to get into tonight. And in fact, I wanted to, very first, right out of the gate, I wanted to talk about what we're not going to talk about. So in the beginning, I wanted to say, what we're not going to talk about concerning transgenderism is we're not going to talk about politics, right? And there's a lot that could be said. There's all the legislation. There's a lot of concerns about, um, some of the legislation that's being discussed concerning, trans rights, as it's called, or lack thereof, as others would say. But we're not getting into that. We're not going to talk about the social impacts, even though it kind of seems like we would be. But we're not going to really even highlight that. I feel like that's being discussed quite a bit as well. Social impacts being, issues with transgenderism being taught in schools, some of the other cultural influences. We could talk about entertainment and those types of things, but we're not going to talk about that. And the other topic that we could dive into, where there's a lot of information, is healthcare. More so, I would say, physical healthcare. Right. I think we're going to delve a little bit into sort of thoughts around it, and someone might include that in sort of the mental health corner of things. But we're not going to talk about healthcare tonight, and all of those topics are being discussed. There's other places to go for those things, for those types of conversations, those topics. But in this,
And you might be saying, like,
yeah,
then what is left? I mean, if not that, then what is left, right?
yeah, that's
But
it.
there's a bigger and I believe more important component which leads into the spirit world, a spiritual component to transgenderism that most people sort of talk about. Like they'll hint at it. They'll post a meme. Like I'll see conservative pages post a little Baphomet, because Baphomet, of course, was the first transgender, or not the first, but at least one of the most popular transgender kind of icons in our modern times of evil. And it's, yeah, it's a man goat with breasts, and it's both feminine and male and non-binary and all that.
Hmm.
And the conservatives love to jump on that kind of like topical spiritual, like, yeah, this is a spiritual battle, but how deep does this rabbit hole go, right? And that's, I think, where we're going to explore a little bit more here on this episode.
Yeah, exactly. So we are going to talk about, and I would put it into the corners of philosophy and apologetics. And of course,
Mhm.
apologetics spills over into sort of that logical discussion of Christianity and also the spiritual discussion of Christianity. So you've got kind of all those different areas. We're going to concentrate on that more specifically. And again, for some, this might be the first time you've talked about these kind of thoughts and topics, at least in this realm.
Mhm.
But I think this is where the title of the stream tonight, did Christians get trans wrong? Transgenderism, are we thinking about it properly? I think this is the arena that we need to start, because I really do think Christians in general, or some would say the church, I think we have thought about transgenderism in all of those other categories and not enough in this category. Like you were saying, if you just want to put the simple label on it, the supernatural, the spiritual end of things, I don't think we've thought about it enough there.
I agree. Um, like I said, I think most of the time when it's brought up, like this is a spiritual battle, it's kind of like, oh, it's demons, or that's about it. Like it doesn't really lead into anything other than we need to rise against this thing. And I agree with those things. But the more informed you are about how deep this rabbit hole goes, as we like to say, I think you'll be a little bit more, I don't know, maybe even more inspired to do something about it in the spiritual world, because it's a lot more serious and more nefarious than you might think, and it actually leads into what we've discussed on Fire Theft Radio, is like the Hydra kind of stuff, the plans of the New World Order, right? So I mean, it's all part of it. So I mean, you open it up, Mav. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I need to do a little shout out, Trinity. There you are, doing some lurking, getting ready for bed. Right on. Glad you're here. This is going to be one of those topics. Maybe it'll stir up your mind a little bit. Maybe not the best right before bed sort of conversation, but it's going to be good anyway. I think transgenderism, as we've been sort of, or as it's been talked about popularly, I think it's almost in its own sort of box without its real connections everywhere else. Because if you think about it philosophically, or if you've read about it philosophically, this is sort of going. This vine has been growing from something that was planted in the '60s and the '70s.
Mm.
This is something that is a part of, or some would say it's a path leading to, a transhumanism. So in the philosophical realm, transgenderism was always discussed in the '70s, in the '80s, uh, and I think in the '90s that's where the transition started happen. Pardon the pun, but it transitioned from being discussed in these philosophical roots into something different. I think it's because it was actually being presented more so publicly, but it was always connected with transhumanism. And the idea being that in order for transhumanism, which is basically, if you want to give it sort of that philosophic sort of thought, that one sentence put in your pocket kind of definition, and take it with you. Transhumanism being moving beyond, or moving on from being a human or being human like, and that's the most basic
or
definition.
or moving on, being the even the, well, along with this trans movement, the moving on being a binary sort of human being, right? Men and women, but into, which is weird, into technological binary, almost computer like, you know.
Exactly. And I think what it is, it's a stepping stone there, because if you have to throw off, in sort of how it was discussed in the '60s and the '70s and the '80s, you have to throw off these shackles of a binary sort of system, or that man and woman sort of system, because then you'll have to move on. So if you abandon this, then you are forced to move beyond it to something else. It was always kept very nebulous in when it was discussed in some of those. I was like, move beyond what? Because you brought up a couple things: move on to technology, move on to fill in the blank. But as technology
Mhm.
has progressed, I think that a lot of us would start to fill in those blanks a little bit more easily, right? We've moved on to then the metaverse, or the downloading of your consciousness, or whatever those few little breadcrumbs that they put just onto the horizon. So you have to kind of move out in that direction to go and find.
Right. And in order to be okay with that, um, there had to have been an ideological subversion, which we discussed in the Hell Hydra series, and that's what you mentioned was happening in the 60s and 70s. A lot of the CIA, a lot of the alphabet soup agency money was funding these rock bands, the whole what's his name that just died not too long ago, sings that song Fame. It's gonna kill me. I can't believe.
Oh man.
uh, David Bowie. So David
Oh yeah.
Bowie, and then Cinderella, and all this kind of androgynous kind of man looks like a woman with makeup, and that you needed the ideology to be present and to be pushed hard for a
Mhm.
few decades, so that it became pretty normal as a countercultural, at least as a countercultural idea that existed within a culture, so that we can have I guess a foundation to where it was going to build from there. And you see a lot of that happening in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So definitely need to pay attention to these things that happen in culture and music and movies, because there's an agenda that's been going on for decades. And I think what's that guy's name, the Russian dude, Yuri
Yuri.
Bezmenov,
Yeah.
yeah, talks about you need less than a generation, just one generation
Mhm.
can completely subvert the next generation for the future, and switch them in a different direction. And I do believe that's exactly what was happening in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which kind of you can see the fruit of that now in the 90s and in the 2000s for sure.
Yeah, and it was just kind of getting it, just and people were dabbling in it, just kind of thinking about it. But oddly enough, I think one of the better sort of views of this was Demolition Man. You remember Demolition Man?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Type Taco Bell in the chat if you remember Demolition Man. But Demolition Man, you've got Sly Stallone, who goes in the future. He's hunting Blade, the original Blade. I
Right.
can't think of his name all of a sudden. Oh, Wesley
Wesley
Snipes.
Snipes. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea is they've gone there, and some weird things happen, like Arnold Schwarzenegger's president, and Taco Bell's the only fast food. That's most of the things I can remember. But one of the things that they talk about is that they have moved beyond biological sex. That's seen
Mhm.
as weird and icky now.
Right. It's disgusting. Right.
And it's for them, they've moved past that. Kids are mixed up in the lab and then inserted,
Hmm.
and so you've got some of these little ideas being dropped. And the thing is that those type of ideas are they're important to kind of begin to embed. And I think also, if you look at Futurama, you've got some of these things. Mostly in
Hmm.
the we would then talk about the disembodied nature. Obviously, they have to. It's animation. You have to have something. So they'll have the head in the jar,
Hmm.
and then they're essentially non-human if you think of it. But you've got the best parts of them that are there, and they can represent. And it's of course the butt
Right.
of a bunch of jokes. But these sorts of ideas, they're all kind of scrambled and thrown out there, but they start to come together with in this transhumanism kind of idea. They start to come together in transgenderism, because in order for you to move on beyond human, you have to start to sort of put the stop gaps in these certain places. So the plan always was, philosophically, in some of these papers you can read about it from the 70s, and I'll try and find them and put them in the description, put some of the links in here. But they wanted to move to postgenderism, because if you can move to postgenderism, then you get to choose. You get to choose those things for yourself.
Right. That I was going to say there is a common denominator that they are making sure people. I don't know that I guess it's the they want to really focus on that, and the common denominator is emotions.
Mhm.
Because they want to say emotions can be kind of bottled up, put inside of a robot. Human beings can be cyborg like they want to bottle up what it is, what consciousness is, what it is to exist as a human, and make that, oh, that's just, we can do that with advanced technology, and it's just how you feel. So it's
Mhm.
really interesting because they want to focus on that, because especially now with the transgender movement, it's all about what you feel you identify as, and
Right.
that is your reality. And that is happening simultaneously in the technological world, right? We see stuff like the propaganda from Ready Player One. When the movie
Mhm.
starts, it's like you can be anyone. They even say you can be a woman, man, you can be a magician, you can be a warlock, you can be whatever, like they mention all these things. And it might be like a simple, like, oh, you can be players in a video game, but really the foundation of that ideology right there is you can identify with whatever, and we can make that manifest technologically.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the hope of the metaverse, which has kind of imploded at this point.
Yeah.
Is the idea you can jump in, much to Basil's behest, it has kind of imploded. And now I think actually the more dangerous category of this, which is augmented reality. So now you will still be in the quote unquote, the normal world, and you will then be able to view some of these artificial things, or you could have a separate avatar but you're still be in the real world. That's almost worse. You mentioned Ready Player One. Have you read Ready Player Two?
I have not, no.
Ready Player Two, it takes it to that next step, to that next level. So
Mm.
it gets even more intense. Where they well, I won't spoil anything, but they move beyond just even this world, the physical world. But all those things, I think, and it's really important. I think that you mentioned the idea of feelings, and I think this is one part of this too. And this is even and 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 I hope that people understand that we're trying to take a step back and look at a philosophy. We aren't wanting to belittle or to make fun of or to mock anyone who's in this. For the most part, anyone who's in something that draws them away from truth, we would say that you're at some level of manipulation, and that is never a thing to laugh at or to mock, especially when you're talking about it in this type of seriousness. So that we don't want to put off that air that we're mocking, because we hope that there will be sort of a sliver of truth that we can start to see how these pieces fit together. But I'm going to kind of move on to this next sort of idea. Transgenderism, we've talked about, is kind of connected, or is not kind of, it is connected with transhumanism. But transhumanism itself does also have this nugget that it is connected with as well, which I believe is neo Gnosticism, a 21st century Gnosticism. And in case you don't, if you're not familiar with the definition of Gnosticism, it does have to do with the inner man and the outer man, or the material self and the non-material self. And what's so interesting is, I think this is becoming extremely prevalent without people really realizing that philosophy is sort of taking over. It really is. In the 20th century, it was materialism that really took over. In the 21st century, it is this new type of Gnosticism that is really starting to seep its way into all of these different places. So, are you familiar with Gnosticism and Gnostic philosophy, Chuck?
Yes, and it did remind me of that when you brought it up, and I hadn't connected the dots, but immediately it kind of rung a bell, because now, if people don't know, in the Gnostic world, there's this sense of bringing what is not palpable, what is not physical, into the physical world. And I think that's exactly what's going on in the transgender movement. Now your
Mhm.
feelings are able to manifest themselves physically through technology, right? If you want to be a man and you're a biological woman, you can manifest that in a sense into reality through the technology that we have available now, and vice versa. If you were born a biological man, and many other things. I mean, there's people that are injecting all sorts of weird uh, hormones and even different DNAs because they want to experiment with different things. It's a wild west when it comes to that, and the image of God, which is your body, the temple of God, is being drastically uh, modified and changed, and it's all based on the immaterial. It's like
Mhm.
what I feel or think, and then bringing that into existence by using our technology. So it's just kind of, I don't know, it's a weird place, man.
Yeah, and just so that we're all on the same page, I wanted to read an entry from the World Encyclopedia. Yeah, believe it or not, there's still encyclopedias around. Of course, this is an online one.
I was about to say that. I'm
Uh,
like, what?
yeah, yeah. So, and
I
and the
got a
reason.
Britannica in the other room right now.
Oh, there you go. Like, see,
Whole
well, you
set.
can see if you can find it. Um, but Gnosticism. I'm going to read just a real quick definition of Gnosticism, so we kind of see what that sort of standard definition is, and we can kind of play off of that. Gnosticism is the belief that human beings contain a piece of God, the highest good or divine spark within themselves, which has fallen from the immaterial world into the bodies of humans. All right, so that's part one. It talks about this immaterial. So the immaterial is divine. Okay. And then the second part is all physical matter is subject to decay, rotting, and death. Those bodies in the material world created by an inferior being are therefore evil. And so you've got this juxtaposition of what is immaterial is divine or godlike, and what is material is decay, rotting, and death. All right, it is inferior. And then the last statement here: trapped in the material world, but ignorant of its status, the pieces of God, that immaterial parts of us, require knowledge or gnosis. That's where you get the word Gnostic from, to inform them of their true status. That knowledge must come from outside the material world, and the agent who brings it is called the Savior or the Redeemer. So that is the setup of
Mm,
Gnosticism.
right.
And if you needed an example of how that works, we get to take a little trip back to 1999 to the movie
Ooh.
theater, and we get to watch The Matrix.
Yeah, that is
And then,
incredibly Gnostic movie.
in fact, oh, of course, his name is going to escape me. He's a well-known comic book writer who is also a wizard, practices witchcraft, who is himself, as he would call himself, a
Mm.
Gnostic priest. Of
Are we
course, I
talking
can't
about
remember his
Frank
name.
Miller?
Not Frank Miller. Close though. Somebody else. Actually, Trinity would know this. Um, did Watchmen? Why
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
escaped
yeah.
my brain?
I
This is
get you.
where we need some help. It completely went out of my head. Anyway, he has stated, being a Gnostic priest, as he would cost himself. Not Neil Gaiman. Who is it? Shoot. He's a crazy looking dude, Alan
Yeah,
Moore.
Alan Moore. Yeah.
Nailed it. Thanks, Trinity. Appreciate it. You get a gold star. So so Alan Moore has said that basically the Matrix was the greatest evangelistic work for modern Gnosticism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you want to understand what Gnosticism is, that is the basic philosophy of the Matrix, meaning that what you think is material is less important or inferior to what is really internally inside. So in that movie, obviously, what is inside your mind, your heart, your soul was what was existing, and could go back and forth between these different worlds, if you want to think of it that way. The material body was not as real as the body that was plugged into the matrix, right?
Right. And I think it's important to point out that the people that really identify with a transgender identity, most of them uh, give themselves over to this ideology so fervently as if they were giving themselves over to Christ. It is a religious experience to them. They are literally becoming someone else, being born again into something else. And it just goes to show that when you don't follow God, it's impossible in to not in one way or another form some sort of idea or some sort of replacement ideology and follow that religiously because you were designed that way by God. You were designed to believe in something that is beyond the physical world.
Right.
And these people that are uh, subscribing to this trans movement are definitely doing that. It's like a version of a religion, and you
Hmm.
can you definitely even see, and I know we weren't going to talk about it so much or mention it, but you can see, you know, with these shootings that these people are willing to die and to kill for
Yeah.
what they believe in. It's just one of those things where that is a response to something that is very spiritual and religious in nature.
You'd have to think, and again, we're not going to jump into that realm and talk about those things, but even just on a philosophical sense, when you start to think what is internal is more important than what is physical, that starts to have an effect to where you think other people, if I kill a material body, it's not as important as if I were to kill a soul, which I can't, right? So you start to think through some of those things. And we would say, obviously, any type of violence towards anyone else would be completely immoral in that way. But if you take that philosophy to its end point, you can start to play off of it and branch out, and you start to rethink some of those things that we would say are inherently known. Um, Real quick, I did want to bring this up. This is a very well received book. I've read parts of it. I haven't read all of it.
What's it called?
It's
Put it
it's
up again.
called Irreversible Damage.
Irreversible damage.
Irreversible Damage: The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. So it's written from and it's actually a very well researched book, and it handles the topic pretty well. Before I get into that, I do want to highlight this. Trinity gave us a little note here. It said, I think the gist of what we have is the Spirit of God, to have the want, the drive to do good, to transcend the simple things of the mind to keep us down, but the physical body makes us, makes one seek vanity. I think that you're hitting on it. I think, Trinity, I think you're hitting on those right points. And the one thing we're going to go into in just a second is what is thought of as Gnosticism and those things. Gnosticism touches on what is real. So this is what's so important to understand, and we're going to talk about it more, is that Gnosticism recognizes the truth that the immaterial is important. So even if we just took that point alone, the immaterial part of a person is important. That right there is a revolutionary thing to say for a lot of people, right? Um, but anyway, we'll get to that in just a second. But I wanted to see, I saw that, I wanted to point that out. So irreversible damage. There's some really interesting things in here, really sad things, because it's more than just that. What the topic we're talking about specifically as far as that. But anyway, I wanted to give this statement, read the statement out of here. So this is talking about someone who's case study. Her name is Benji, a transgender person who's able to sort of like talk about their experiences in going through this. So they got into transgenderism when they were young, and now they're older and they're thinking back on it and in a more in a different light. But here's one thing that they stated here: postmodern queer theory regards experience as more valid than fact. She said, this, the person's interviewing her, and her generation imbibes endless streams of this ideology from the internet. So when you see somebody, and they say on Tumblr, but you could just say anyone online,
Mhm.
talking about their experience and their opinions, that can trump data and facts because experience is more authentic than data or something. So even this recognition, they would even state, the people who would identify with a transgenderist sort of understanding of things, that an experience that you have, so what you think about something, how you experience the thing, right? That we would say the experience part would be the immaterial part of an action or something, right? Is more important than a fact. It's more real. It's more important. So when you start to delineate these things this way, you can start to see how the philosophy can really start to mess with you if it's added to something like social media, where you essentially, because of the algorithms, you feed into all these things like an echo chamber, and it just, the sound bounces back and forth, and that same philosophy and the encouragement to continue on a path just bounces and gets louder and louder as you partake in those different things and you act those things out. What do you think about that, Chuck?
No, I 100% agree. And uh, I think a lot of people aren't really, I don't know, they get a little emotional and kind of latch on to what you see about this topic on the news. And they kind of stick to that. And again, not a bad thing. Not a bad thing, but like there's more to the story here, because when you looked at this before, you might have thought maybe a year or two, maybe 3 years back, it was like, oh, it's an attack on masculinity and it's attack on women, sort of like the conservative side kind of saw, wait a minute, they're erasing women with this as well, because at first it was like, oh, they're erasing men, they're making men more feminine, and yeah, but now they're making women men, right? Like the number one transgender athletes, or the number one female athletes, are transgender men, like,
Yeah.
and it's like, it's so weird, like the twisted logic, that one, I can kind of relate. When I was in a cult, if people know my past, I was in a sort of weird cult back in the day, where I would justify a lot of bad theology just because I felt it was right, and I would just skip all over the Bible trying to justify this idea that it was as I thought I believed. And you see these women, and the women athletes that are actually affected by this are, speaking out, but of course that's not reported, or it's suppressed in the media, and they don't appreciate that, because now, these all of these lines are being blurred. So it went way beyond destroying the nuclear family. It really went down to specifics to destroy the entire gender idea, period. Like, let's just get rid of
Yeah.
what that is. It really went way beyond most people thought it was going to go to.
Yeah, I think I don't think that people really thought it was going to get beyond a fad, a sort of
Mhm.
like one of those things that you just kind of experience when you're younger and then you grow out of, or something like that. I think that was what a lot of people thought about. What
Yeah.
I find really interesting, though, and you mentioned this, conservatism, they looked at what was going on in what they would just call, in the general sort of ideas, progressivism, because then you'd have those who buy into or follow or are real believers in transgenderism as a philosophy, and then you
Mhm.
have those who maybe don't really hold to it, but they are what they would call allies, right? They're on that side. So it's progressivism on that side, and you have conservatism on this side. So what's interesting is you have essentially on that side that generally was not religious or spiritual in that sense, on more on the left hand side of things, the left side, all of a sudden holding to this Gnostic philosophy, or at least what had a nugget of connection with the Gnostic philosophy.
Mhm.
And the juxtaposition on the conservative side is they're actually the ones who normally are more connected with religiosity or with spiritualism, and they are trying to redeem or push for redeeming the physical. And so on both sides, you got this very weird flip,
Mhm.
right? So the progressives are now moving into this realm where they are saying the immaterial is more important, and you've got those who normally would be on the side of the spiritual are now pushing and saying no, the physical is really important, and their emphasis is changing on that side too.
Right. And it goes to show that most people, and I don't want to generalize, but when you're like a Christian and you're a nationalist, you blur the lines too much, and then you don't know how to actually mix it properly when you need to. And sometimes you separate the experiences of, like, me as a Christian. It's impossible. I understand now more than ever that it's impossible for me to separate myself from the supernatural world. There,
Mhm.
even in churches I used to go to, like, oh, there's the supernatural world and then there's the natural world. And I'm like, no, I disagree. It's all part of it. Like it and like you said, now in a very weird secular way, I guess you can say secular religion, and
Mhm.
I believe it comes. I mean, not to go too deep into it, but it derives from the fallen gods, the fallen entities of the past, and like we know about that stuff in Fire Theft Radio. But like it derives from there for sure. But
Mhm.
the point is that they're the ones now really going into that realm, like you just said, where the immaterial is a reality. And it kind of feeds into also, and it might seem like a different subject, but it feeds into the new age religions, the new age kind of
Right.
uh you know manifest your reality, whatever your reality is. You live your truth, whatever your truth is. That's what's going on. And we had a lot of daytime TV shows pushing that garbage for a good hot minute, for at least 20
Yeah.
years that I can remember. Oprah started with that nonsense long time ago.
Yeah. Eckhart Tolle and
And
so
the
yeah.
book The Secret, and going into all that
Mhm.
stuff. And
And
so
and what that
it's even
is, that's a different, sorry to cut you off. That's Gnosticism brought to a more like palatable sort of thing, because you're taking this immaterial
more.
thing and you're trying to manifest. I mean, that's the essence of magic, is you take something from the immaterial world and you want to bring it into the material world.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so they are buying into that, but of course then you make it real, because oh, the thing that I'm manifesting is like a
Well,
a car or a job or a relationship or something. They put it in the realm so it's not like turning lead to gold or something like that. It's something that they would have more tangibly, so it's more palatable to have that philosophy, right?
it's a transmutation, like, it's you
Yes.
changing something that exists already into something else, and that is what witchcraft is, right?
And that is in the essence what transgenderism is. It's a
Exactly.
very, very specific and select transmutation
Mhm,
that is
mhm,
directed by someone through a certain form to manifest something that is immaterial into the material.
right. And again, more connections to these ritualistic kind of occult practices that I don't think most people are realizing. And there's more connections to that than just, oh yeah, it's a demon making people all kinds of stuff. Like, no, it's a lot of rituals, man. It's a lot of magic with a K. Uh, bringing stuff into existence from somebody's consciousness, and it's just, man, it's
Yeah.
it's it's deep. Hell Hydra.
Yeah, it's got its tentacles going all out, and it is pulling all these things together, and things are far more connected than anyone would imagine. But going back to the topic, going back to actually the title of what we put on the thumbnail tonight, did Christians get trans wrong? And I think that we started to talk about that, where you had, if we want to put Christians just outside of sort of that conservative kind of idea, because that's normally where they would put
Mhm.
them, and that's just because Christianity is here, and as the culture moves back and forth, it's just wherever the culture happens to be. Christianity is what it is, but just culture moves around it.
Yeah.
So it's really not right or left. It's actually just separate. But anyway, most people would say, oh, where Christians are, they're more conservative. So like we're saying, the temptation in response to this is to lean really hard into the physical, which means then the conversation normally is what you're doing to your body is wrong. And I feel like that is the wrong place to start when you're having a conversation, because Transgenderism as a philosophy started in the same place, or at least in a similar place, that Christianity starts, which is there is the immaterial and it is important. Just starting there, there is a lot more connected with real biblical Christianity and the general philosophy of transgenderism, or we should say Gnosticism. There is a connection there where there is an acknowledgement that the immaterial is real and the physical is real. And that philosophy and that understanding actually goes and flies in the face of the entire 20th century philosophic idea, which is that there's only the material. Generally, in the West, right? You always had spiritual connections in different cultures. But without that connection, people are just talking past each other in these things. And they're having arguments over things without recognizing that in the transgender movement, and this is where I think the general popular idea of what Christians think about transgender kids or people, or however that looks, right? However they state it, it's wrong, because real true biblical Christianity, it is that and more. Because real true biblical Christianity, the understanding of the gospel, the real understanding of the gospel, is God the Father wants to redeem both the immaterial and the material parts of humans. The Lord wants to save whole humans,
right?
Physical and immaterial.
Where we as humans muddy up that world and just get it so wrong, he comes to redeem that aspect of us. And where everyone goes off on their own ideological tangents, he's like, no, 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 no. I break all those walls, all those barriers, and I bring us all into redemption through what I've done on the cross, right? And so it's important to see that connection, and maybe even find a way to no pun intended, I guess, identify with these trans people in a sense, so that we can break through that barrier and not just, I guess, bash on that barrier or their identity. Because when Jesus came along, I mean, he was very, very harsh with other people that thought they were following God, but everyone else, he's kind of like, all right, you guys are really bad, but I gotta help you guys. Like, and so, and he approached them much differently than he approached the Sadducees and Pharisees and those types, because they swear they were following God, and yet they were so pious and hypocritical and so disconnected from humanity. And that's exactly what I feel like. Sometimes I feel guilty of that as well. I sometimes you see these things happen, and I don't know, I almost feel bad because I posted it on Fire Theft Radio, this whole like this girl like talking about all of these different things she identifies as, and I was like, that is crazy, right? And the comments were brutal, just very brutal. And I actually turned off the comments because I'm not for that. Like, I'm not here to break that person down and say, dude, you need, oh, you're just crazy, you need psychological help. Like, all the insults were the same. And whether I agree to an extent, but actually you, the person who are trying to offend her, are supposed to be part of the solution, not just let me hurl insults at this person. And again, I'm not saying be with them and be pro trans or pro LGBTQ. Of course not. But I'm saying, we're saying here, Mav is saying, we need to approach this in a very specific way that is most people are not, where they're just like the Pharisees, ready to throw stones and not really addressing a much larger spiritual problem.
And I think that what is being identified in the transgender community is the internal part of me is important, and they don't understand how it can connect with the physical, right? That is something that a lot of people have suffered in the past, but there wasn't the same type of encouragement or outlet that there is today. So you have something now that's pretty rampant, which is rapid onset gender dysphoria, where you have young people who are having these thoughts or feelings and basically being encouraged to push it to these other places that they shouldn't go. And I said we weren't going to get into some of the health things or whatever, but honestly, they're being taken advantage of I mean, when the pharmaceutical companies can make $7 million on one person who wants
one person. I mean,
$7 million.
Historically speaking, the medical world, the pharmaceutical world, always takes advantage of the cash cow. I mean, there was hospitals here locally. If you research that whole thing, what happened during COVID, I mean, if you just said someone had it, you would get, I don't know how many thousands of dollars per person on the budget, on top of the budget for the hospital. So everyone had it, no matter if you had it or not,
Mhm.
because the government was throwing so much money at hospitals per person that identified of having COVID.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and when this came along and it became a thing, it's the same thing. I mean, $7 million per person.
It's
I think
insane.
that's per year. And I think that's per year or something like that. It's like an
It
insane
could
amount,
be.
or per transition or something like that. But I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
just imagine uh per person. Like, I mean, there's thousands and thousands of people now, if not more, just
Mhm.
coming out every week, every month, and that kind of money rolling out. I mean, of course, the pharmaceutical industry is going to fund movies. It's going to fund music. What it's going to
Yeah.
pay musical artists and all of that stuff to push that forward. Because guess what? There's a lot of money involved in that.
There's a lot there. There's more incentive to continue whatever the status quo is than to provide helpful care for people. And you know what? Helpful care for someone might be sitting and talking. Like I'm really feeling this more and more. Like we, I really think that we may have missed the boat on some of these things. And we're going to have to make up for it, honestly.
But
Like there are people who are genuinely confused and hurting, and whatever that looks like. And I think that, and I'm not saying that to be insulting to someone. I think they would say that themselves. That's why they're trying to look for something else. They're confused and hurting. And the real gospel, which is the Lord wants to redeem that important thing that's inside you, your soul, your heart, who you are, and also wants to redeem you, your physical body as well as a whole unit. That is revolutionary for a lot of people. And we, just a couple weeks ago, we celebrated the resurrection. The resurrection was the resurrection of Jesus is the promise that God will redeem both your heart, soul, your mind, and your body all together, you as a whole human being. And that was the whole point. And I wanted to look at this one, this few verses here, this one section of scripture real quick, because this is what should be offered to people who are wanting something more than just, oh yeah, your physical body's just going to die and be destroyed. Look at this. This is Colossians chapter 1, verse 15, starting in verse 15. He, talking about Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. The invisible God, firstborn over all creation, right? Verse 16, for all things in heaven and earth were created in him. All things, whether visible or invisible, whether thrones or dominions, that's the spiritual realm, principalities of power, spiritual realm, all things were created through him and for him. So the created things, these are all of those things together, right? Verse 17, he himself is before all things, and all things are held together in him.
Mhm.
And so just even starting to talk about this, we haven't even finished this whole passage here, but that's almost enough to really chew on this idea that the point and the purpose of a relationship with God, or the redemption that God can provide, is both for your immaterial self and your material self. It's for all of it. That's why Jesus, who started out as an immaterial being, came into the world as a material being so that he could unite all of those things in himself.
Amen.
And I think we've kind of missed the boat. Like when someone says that me, myself, I'm in the wrong body, what they're saying is who I am inside is not defined by my physical body. And that, for us, we say, I understand that paradigm. I understand what you mean.
You mean you're saying you're broken, you're
Yeah,
fallen. The Bible agrees. And
exactly.
he can redeem that, but that's the extra step that isn't really talked about, that there is also a redemptive part of that. But because it is a secular religion that is being pushed, they are trained to believe that the Bible is against them entirely. And it's actually the thing that will restore them. It's actually the thing that will make them feel whole. Because, I mean, if you're honest, there's so many videos of these people even saying now that I still don't feel right. I still don't feel whole. I still don't. I feel worse, or I regret the transition and things like
Hmm.
that. And there's a lot of that happening. I mean, I'm not even sure how that'll look like 10 years from now. It's going to be terrible, right? And
Hmm.
there's definitely a lot of things but I don't want to latch on to those specific stories that I've seen and say this is what it is. But I just know that God can make people feel whole, period. And that can come from I feel depressed, I feel anxiety, I feel anger, I feel hatred, I feel like I'm in the wrong body, I feel like I should be a different species or anything. Those
Yeah.
are all things that Jesus can redeem. He can make you feel whole. It's part of what he says. We're all broken. The earth itself is broken. I'm going to redeem the earth. I'm going to redeem you, all of you.
Yeah.
You're This isn't your home. You might not feel you might not feel right here. Many people feel that way.
Hmm.
Guess what? God already knows that, and he's trying to redeem you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the conversations need to start somewhere different. I think, and I think we should have the proper conversations with people. And I think so. Speaking as a Christian, for someone who I might meet who's transgender, if they found out I was a Christian, they may actually have more hate for me than I might feel for them at that moment, just because of the rhetoric that's out there.
Mhm.
And so, what do they need to know? They need to know that, hey, I don't condemn you. I can't condemn anyone. I can only offer you what's been offered to me, right? That's what Peter said,
And
to the
I,
lame
I think I should have put
person.
a disclaimer prior, and that isn't to say I'm cool with transgender pastors and transgender, like that. I'm cool with it. Period. Or hey, you know what? Use whatever restroom you'd like. No, 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 no. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that these people need to be talked to in a way that I think is a little bit more biblical, instead of just shunning them completely and saying you're what's wrong with the world. And it's like, no, what is behind that thing that makes them feel that way is
Yeah,
what's wrong with the world, right? Not
right.
them particularly, right? It's just there's more to the story. And I think kind of like the old Christian church and like homosexuality, they react to it so aggressively. And I understand it, but at the same time, it's like they miss the boat on what they're supposed to be doing in helping that person in the redemption process.
Yeah, I mean, there was that time in the I'd probably put it in the 90s. I think Trinity is roughly my age. You could probably help me out with that, whether that's correct or not. But somewhere in the 90s, there was that popular conversation that was happening, and it was happening in like comedies and movies and TV and whatever, and also in serious realms where people were saying, I was born this way. Other people saying, no, you weren't born this way. You're choosing that. And that was this very weird thing. And I think biblically, a Christian has to say, yes, you were born that way. We are all born this way. Anyone who's born is born into a broken world with a broken body, broken mind, and a broken heart. And that's kind of the point of the gospel is we are there. And there became this very weird fight to say you weren't born this way. Yes, yes, they were. They were born this way. We're all born like that. And it takes really submitting to
Mm.
that offer that Jesus has, that you can move into something that's far more healthy and far more
Do
whole.
you keep up with any of those apologetic type preachers that go to universities or street preaching and things like that? Pretty popular ones out there right now.
There's a
Uh,
couple of them
I
that
forgot
that I
this guy's name,
yeah,
but he's a little older. He's probably in his, I don't know. He looks in his 50s,
50s.
maybe. Pretty clean cut guy, kind of like hair parted to the side, and
Yeah.
a girl asked him, like, because he stands right there in front of schools, and then he pretty much is like a Christian Crowder or a more apologetics Crowder. he's like
Yeah.
asking me a question, or he puts a thing out, and then people come up and ask him a question. One of the questions is about this kind of homosexuality, transgender. It fits for both. And it's like, what do you do about people that feel that's how they were born, that they have these inclinations towards men or the opposite sex, or they're in the wrong body? How can you judge them for something like that, that they're born that way, that if for what they feel they're inclined to do, how can they be judged by God by that? And then he goes, well, he simplifies and says, so what you're telling me is, how can they be judged by what they're feeling they're inclined to do, right? And
Mm.
she's like, yes. And he's like, well, me as a heterosexual male, do you think I'm inclined to sleep with only one woman? And then she's like, no. And he's like, no, I want to sleep with as many beautiful women as possible, but I don't do it in submission to God and to my wife, you know? And so I submit that because that part of me is broken and fallen, and I don't give myself over to my feelings because that is wrong.
Mhm.
And we tend to, for whatever reason, the people on that side of the community want to kind of nitpick that idea. Like, it's okay to do what you feel, to be what you feel when it comes to this. But
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense if you put that across the board, right? Because even them, amongst them, if they get married, if two trans people get married, they're going to want fidelity against, they're going to want fidelity between the relationship, right? And then I can't bust out, like, if I was trans and I got married with someone trans, I can't bust out, well, my feelings was I needed to go back to this other person. I can't do that.
Right.
I have to submit that feeling and say, no, I got to be faithful unto you. So us giving ourselves over to what we feel is not a good argument for that.
Yeah, feelings have been used as an argument to do a whole lot of horrible things, right? Prisons are full of axe murderers who just had that feeling that they just need to murder a person, you know? I just had that feeling when I woke up that just really to it, or it burned for a lot longer, but they have that feeling, right? And that's, a lot of people who are into that whole, like, uh, you know, uh, was it that true crime sort of thing? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
people are like, oh, they
My
have this feeling.
my
Well, what's wrong with that feeling
my,
then?
my jerk fallen mind always goes to, like, well, what did they say to piss them off that much? I don't know. Like,
Yeah, you did that too. But I think, to try to land this plane here, I think that to again to go back to the topic, did we do it wrong? I think there was the wrong starting point for a lot of conversations that we have about this topic. And I've tried really hard not to give caveats, right? Not to give
mhm,
qualifications or other things to if we are going to say that people who hold to a transgender philosophy understand that their immaterial self is important to the point that materialists should feel uncomfortable, but Christians should see an opening to have
opportunity.
conversations.
Mhm,
I'm not saying that there's a good thing or bad thing, and the reason that I'm not is because why is it that we have to come back to say, but pick a side quickly. I've picked a side. I follow Jesus. I submit to Jesus. I submit to the scripture, right? So I've already picked that side. Do I have to then state, just as a qualifier to everyone else, well, I'm going to care for that person and love that person, but just so you know, I don't like this thing that they do. Like, why do I have to throw that out there? That should be obvious that we
mhm,
don't want people to operate with their imperfect self. That's another way of it saying we don't want them to fulfill a sinful desire. That's the same thing, right? Why should I have to give a caveat to it just so that everyone knows, just so I've picked a side so everyone can clarify? I think that's what made the Pharisees really upset with Jesus, where it seemed like he was for the people, but wouldn't come down and remind everybody that, oh, but remember, we still believe these things, right?
mhm,
He said, hey, I've come to redeem those who need redemption, right? And I love the phrase he says, a physician doesn't go to those who are well, he goes to those who are sick, right?
mhm. Right.
And so Jesus, our God, came. in the flesh, in the material, in order to save our whole selves. And if that is truly the gospel, that is the gospel we need to lead with. And that is, I think, a message of hope for people who can't seem to find a reconciliation of their immaterial self and their physical self.
Interestingly, I just thought of right now, even if I meet somebody that's kind of trans and they're open to coming to church, honestly, I wouldn't even bring up the trans subject. To be honest, I would just invite them,
Yeah.
bring them to church, and regardless of whether you're trans or not, you're still a sinner. You're still a sinner.
Yeah.
Aside from the trans thing itself, you're still probably stole something. You still probably, commit adultery in your mind or in real life. You probably have lied. You are a liar. You probably have broken most of the commandments. So you still need redemption. And I believe God is sovereign and powerful enough to work in that person's heart and mind through those things and even address the issue or the greater issue at hand, which might be the trans issue, and change that person's heart and mind. I mean, it's just one of those things, but it really, the mission is still the same. Let's bring people to God, to Christ, and expand the kingdom and let God do the work that we cannot do. We can't pound people into perfection. That just doesn't work. We're not God. He's the one that does those things. We just preach what is true. We explain what is real, the biblical truth, and we trust in God to do the rest. Do your best, and God does the rest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, regardless of all of those things, you meet someone, hey man, let's come to church. Oh, why? Because I'm trans? No, man. We all need Jesus, man. We need Jesus, and the conversations can open up from there after you get to know the person, and regardless of where you stand, we need God. Period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important to remember. And I'm glad that you made those statements. The fact that it's not the trans thing isn't the thing that keeps you from the Lord. It is that's that is where someone who is searching for truth should be
Mhm.
going and going to the Lord and going to his presence to find that, to go to the word and to understand. And it really does come down to, let me introduce you to the Lord. Let me show you these different things. And the Lord is the one who does the work in someone's heart. And we are all broken people and we all need to be made whole. It's just that some of us have those things that are very blatantly outside of our own selves, and some of us have those things that are more internal. But anyway you shake it, people should be treated as those who are created in the image of God, who should be whole people. And um yeah, I'm glad we were able to have this conversation. And I don't know, who knows, we're gonna get a bunch of hate for it, but that's definitely
Well,
not the intention. The intention is to share an understanding of love and care for others.
yeah. I think for our listeners at Fire Theft Radio, it's an opportunity, because the reason we did a lot of UFO episodes, alien episodes, and even like creature episodes, cryptid episodes, all of those things are related to biblical topics in one way or another. And they are, if you know about them, they are gateways or opportunities to speak to someone about God. And it is the same thing with this subject. It's the same thing. They are admitting to you that there is a spiritual world, that there is something other than what they experience in the physical world. And you can agree to that as a Christian and say, yes, you are right. And guess what? That's the beautiful part about Jesus Christ, is he says, I can redeem the stuff that has fallen in your spiritual world and in your physical world, right? And he's, again,
Right.
this redemptive quality that just kind of breaks through all those barriers. So there's opportunities everywhere, folks, to evangelize, to witness to any kind of broken person. God can break any barrier. It doesn't matter what it is. You just got to approach it in a specific way, and then just pray for that discernment, pray for the Holy Spirit to guide you. Because I know, like myself, I mean, even Paul was guilty, right? I mean, there's a couple times he just showed up, guns a-blazing, and he almost got killed for it. And he's like, all right, I'll be back in a few years, and approach that differently. And he still got messed up later anyways. But my point is we have to approach things with wisdom, be a Berean, know how to approach it, when to approach it. And I think God will guide us. And we submit to him, and he'll show us what to do and when to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so for Maverick Pilgrim channel listeners, Chuck, where can we find all your stuff?
Yeah, firetheftradio.com. If you don't like what I said, you don't like the sound of my voice, you don't like how I speak, you can message me on Fire Theft Radio Instagram or Facebook, and or firetheftradio@gmail.com. You can catch us on all those podcatchers like Spotify, Podomatic, iTunes. You can go to your Apple Podcast and all that good stuff. We're all over the place. Leave us a rating. It really does help spread the fire, as we like to say over there on Fire Theft Radio. And appreciate all the new folks that are coming on and messaging, and new supporters, which I will give you a shout out. I think I'll put it in the front of this episode, by the way. And
nice.
And then so that's where you can find us.
Right on. I'll put your links down below. And Maverick Pilgrim on YouTube, Instagram, all those places for everybody on Fire Theft, which I know my stuff's floating around already. But Chuck, this was a wonderful crosscast. They always say don't cross the streams. I don't believe them anymore.
I think so. I mean, like I said, if we get thrown in a FEMA camp, I get top bunk. Might as well.
You've already called it. Yeah.
Yeah, so.
That's right. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. And as I like to say, Pilgrim on, friends, and we'll see you out there.
All right.
Have a good night.